So this is the second video in our series of videos about our aquatic ecology investigation in BSc 2011 lab. And what we're going to do first when we sample the pond is take some abiotic characteristics, water chemistry, as well as turbidity. And turbidity is a measure of the amount of sediment in the water or how murky the water is. So we want to take this first so we don't disrupt the pond before we measure by sampling the organisms before we measure turbidity. Before we do that, I'm going to note the abiotic conditions, the weather conditions, because we know weather can also influence what organisms are there during the day. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is take a couple water samples to measure turbidity, water temperature, and then grab some water to take back to the lab so we can measure some chemistry like pH, nitrates, phosphates, things like that. So to measure turbidity, I'm going to actually use this fancy bucket right here, and it has this little target there in the bottom. And the deal is, if the water is murky, we're not going to be able to see that target very well compared with if it actually looks nice and clear. I'm going to very carefully come down here to the pond. Now you can see a little bit more of the vegetation. So lining the pond here, this is sedge, and I believe it's nut sedge, but I'm not quite sure. You can see there's various vegetation too here in the bottom of the pond. I'm guessing this is green algae of some kind. I don't know the specific species. Another thing that's mentioned on the sheet is what the bottom looks like. So you can see it's pretty still. It wouldn't be considered stagnant because we don't see, like rotting things or, smelly things down in here, but also the water is not moving very much either. So if we look at the bottom or the surface of the pond, it's pretty mucky. I'm guessing it has a clay bottom, definitely not a sand bottom. But we want to be careful, again, taking the turbidity so we don't bring any of this sediment up before we actually measure that value. So what I'm going to do is just very gently get some water into this bucket here. Of course, now I got up some sediment, so I'm going to move over here just a little bit and finish this task. And then we can look down into the bucket and we'll post a little chart that you will use to say how turbid this water is. You can see it's pretty clear. I mean, there's stuff floating around. There's already a little organism in there. It looks like a little fly, but you can see the target pretty clearly. Along with this, what we're going to do is go ahead and measure water temperature. So I have a little thermometer here, if I can find it in my pocket. We're just going to dip this thermometer down into the water sample itself. And we're going to let it sit there for 1 minute. So while we're doing that, I'm going to set this thermometer down here. I'm going to take some more water for a water sample. And again, we'll take this back to the lab and actually analyze what the water chemistry of this is. So that should be enough for our samples that we need. Okay, so I think it's been a minute right now. So what we're going to do is take our thermometer out. And what we can see is that where it's highlighted the most, and it's already, let me put that back in there, fading a little bit. It looks like the water temperature, according to this reading, is between 34 and 38 degrees. This is Celsius. So probably about 30, we're going to call it 36. Actually, we're going to call it 34 degrees Celsius. I think that's fully highlighted right there. It's kind of hard to read these things. They're not quite exact, but that's a good enough estimate for us. This water is pretty warm, in general. If you think room temperature is about 25 degrees Celsius, so it's a bit over room temperature in here right now. So that is the initial measurements that we're going to take. And then in our next video, we're going to demonstrate how to actually sample the pond for the organisms that are living